She carried his pack's children through a blizzard. He found her at dawn, and his wolf finally wept. The blizzard had been at the mountain for 2 days before I arrived at Ironmere, and the gate was standing open. That was the first wrong thing. A pack lord who keeps a proper hold latches his gate at sundown in winter, especially when ice is still falling from the passes, and the road to the valley floor is a gray ribbon of nothing. Lord Kevin of Ironmere was not a careless man. I had collected his tribute twice before, silver ingots and salted wolf hides, always stacked and waiting, and he had always met me at the outer wall, formal to the point of stiffness, his men ranked behind him like carved stones. This morning his gate was open, his men were scattered, and Kevin himself was standing in the yard in his sleeping coat with a torch that had nearly burned down to his fist. I did not speak first. I rarely do. My wolf Fell, I call him because he has always been the oldest part of me, walked at my left heel as we crossed the yard, and even Fell said nothing. He had been silent for 7 years, since the war's last winter. I had grown accustomed to his silence, the way a man grows accustomed to a healed wound that no longer aches, though sometimes I would notice the absence of him the way you notice a room that used to have music and does not anymore. Kevin's torch guttered. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has spent the night being afraid. "My king," he inclined his head, "forgive the gate, we have had a difficulty." "Tell me," I said. He told me. The midwinter rite had taken place the previous evening, as it does in all the northern packs, the gathering in the great hall, the lighting of the hearth fire, the children carrying candles to the outer yard and back. In Ironmere it is done at dusk, before full dark, so the little ones are back inside and fed before the cold deepens. 8 children had gone out with their candles. Only the candles had come back, carried by the wind. The snow had come down hard at the turn of the evening. Not a soft northern snow, but a driving one, the kind that turns landmarks into shapes and shapes into nothing. By the time Kevin's men had understood the children were not simply playing late, the road to the lower forest had disappeared. 3 search parties had gone out and come back with nothing. A 4th had gone and not come back at all. They had turned up at dawn huddled in a shepherd's fold 2 miles south, unhurt but blind with cold. 8 children, missing since dusk the previous evening. "What of your ward servant?" one of Kevin's men said, and I turned to look at him. He was young and embarrassed and trying not to show it. "What ward servant?" I said. Kevin cleared his throat. "There is a woman, a ward of the pack. She has no wolf, no house name, been with us since she was about 15. She tends the elderly and the orphaned pups. He paused. She went out after the children. Went. Shortly after the second search party returned, so midnight approximately, perhaps a little before. I looked at him for a moment in the open gate. The cold was considerable. He was wearing a sleeping coat. "She went alone," I said. "She took a lantern and extra cloaks and the pack's last jar of midwinter honey, and she went alone, yes." He had the grace to look like what he was, a man who had not stopped her and who had not followed her, and who was now standing in his yard at dawn wondering what sort of man he was. We did not realize she was gone until we assumed she had simply gone to bed, and then. "How old is she?" 24, 25 perhaps. We don't know her exact. "No wolf," I said, "no house name." 24 years old, alone in a blizzard since midnight. "Yes, my king." Fell moved. It was the first time he had moved of his own will in 7 years, not at my command, not in response to a scent or a sound I had pointed him toward, but of his own choosing, pressing forward against the gate and looking up the road into the white. His tail did not wag. He was perfectly still, but he was forward in a way I had not seen since the war. I said, "Show me the road she took." We rode north along the midwinter road with 6 of my men and 2 of Kevin's, and the snow had eased to a thin scatter of flakes that drifted sideways more than down. The light was the particular blue of very early morning, not yet dawn, the kind where shadows are sharper than the objects casting them. The road curved up through a stand of black pines before it dropped to the lower forest, and it was at that curve, the tree line, where the pines closed in and the road was barely a gap between them, that Fell stopped. He did not growl, he did not alert, he simply stopped and turned his great gray head to the left, and I knew. I held up a hand and my men stopped behind me. I rode forward alone. She was sitting at the base of a pine that was wide enough for 3 men to stand behind, and she had arranged herself with the kind of economy that comes from thinking clearly in a crisis. Her back against the bark, her outer cloak spread wide and drawn around the bodies of 4 children who were pressed against her sides and chest and lap, sleeping or nearly so. Her own coat beneath was a thin thing, barely more than a long vest with sleeves, and she had taken it half off. I could see the pale line of her shoulder through the gap, to give the warmth of her body more directly to the smallest child, a girl of perhaps 3 who was tucked under her chin like a swallow in a nest. Behind her, arranged in a sort of windbreak against the tree and against each other, were 4 more children, a boy of about 10 acting as the outer wall, and he was awake. He looked up at me with the wary eyes of a child who has been told by the person in charge that whatever happens, he must not sleep, and so he had not slept. The woman was singing. Softly, not the kind of singing meant to be heard across a room, but the kind meant to be felt by something pressed against your chest. A low, tuneless repetition, more breath than melody, that I recognized as the sort of sound you make when you have been making it for hours, and it has become less a song than a heartbeat you are providing for someone else. She had pine sap on her hands. I noticed that before anything else, which seems strange now, but it is true. Her hands were folded around the sleeping children, and there was pine sap darkening her fingers, and the smell of it reached me before anything else, pine sap and warm bread and the cold, and something beneath all of that that made Fell take another step forward, and then go absolutely still in a way he had not done since he was a young wolf, and the world was full of things that astonished him. The boy said in a whisper, "Are you the king?" "Yes," I said just as quietly. He looked at the woman, then he looked at me. "She found us," he said. "She knew where we'd gone because she'd watched us practice the route 3 days ago, and she remembered. She said she had honey and we had to stay awake to get any, but then Lissy fell asleep and she gave Lissy hers." He said all of this in the careful way of someone who wants to make sure the record is accurate. "She hasn't slept at all. She kept checking on everyone." "I know," I said, though I did not know, but looking at her I knew. She had not looked up yet. The child under her chin stirred and she adjusted her arms without thinking, a small automatic tightening, and kept singing. "Wren," the boy said. She looked up. I am not sure what I had expected. Exhaustion, certainly, and fear, and possibly the shamed expression of someone caught doing something that others in authority might interpret as overstepping. What I saw was none of those things. She looked at me with clear gray eyes that were simply present, not startled, not impressed, not apologetic. The way a person looks when they are so entirely focused on what they are doing that the arrival of a king on horseback registers as a fact and not an event. "All 8, I said. "All 8, she said. Her voice was low and a little rough from hours of singing and from cold. "Lissy has been coughing. She'll need the warmth quickly. The older ones are better." She looked at the children around her with the brief, assessing look of someone running through a list, and then she looked back at me. "Can your horses carry them safely?" "Not can you help, not thank goodness you're here. Can your horses carry them safely?" "Yes," I said. "Then we should go now." It took us 2 trips and a good deal of gentle maneuvering to get 8 cold and drowsy children onto horses, and through all of it, Wren moved with a quiet efficiency that I found myself watching when I should have been watching the road. She knew each child's name without looking, called them by name even when they were mostly asleep, a small anchor for them to hold on to. She wrapped and unwrapped and rewrapped the cloak around whoever needed it most in a given moment, and she gave the last of the honey to a red-haired boy who had been clenching his jaw against shivering, and didn't have enough energy left to pretend he wasn't. She did not ask for anything for herself. My man Dirk tried to give her his own outer coat when she handed her cloak up to the horse with the last 2 children, and she said, "I'll walk fast," in a tone that was not rude and was not deferential, and simply closed the subject. "You will ride," I said. She looked at me the way she had looked at me from the base of the pine, clearly, without performance. "Your horses are carrying 8 children. I'll walk fast." "You'll ride with me," I said. She considered this for a moment, not as a compliment, as a logistical arrangement and whether it would compromise the children's transport in any way. "All right," she said, and allowed Dirk to help her up. She sat in front of me on the saddle and held herself very carefully apart, not offended, not bashful, simply precise, as if she understood that warmth was a practical resource and she was not certain she was entitled to it. I put my arm around her waist anyway, because she was shaking in a way she would not have been aware of, the deep involuntary tremor that comes not from cold but from the aftermath of sustained cold, and because Fell walked closer to the horse than he had walked to anything living in 7 years, his great shoulder nearly touching her foot in the stirrup. She noticed, she looked down at him. "He is not usually sociable," I said. "He smells like wood smoke and old grief," she said, and then seemed to realize she had said it aloud. "I'm sorry. I say strange things when I'm tired. I didn't mean." "It is an accurate description," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "How long has he been grieving?" No one had ever asked me that. In 7 years, not one person, not my council, not my generals, not the lords who competed anxiously for my attention, had thought to ask that question, or had thought it was a question that could be asked of a king about his wolf. 7 years, I said. She was quiet again. She was looking down at Fell, who was keeping pace with the horse with his head slightly lifted in her direction. "What happened 7 years ago?" she asked. "The war ended," I said. She turned her head a little, not quite to look at me. "That's a strange thing to grieve." "The war ending was not what he grieves," I said. "Something was lost at the end, something I didn't know to look for until after." She accepted that, the way she had accepted everything, as a fact and not an event, without pressing it into a shape it wasn't ready to hold. We rode the rest of the way to Ironmere in a silence that was not awkward. Fell matched our pace the whole way. He did not look away from her once. The keep's great hall had been turned into a warming room by the time we returned, which meant that Kievan's household had spent the night doing something useful after all. A fire had been built up in the central hearth large enough to heat a cathedral. Blankets and dry stockings and soup that smelled of turnip and salt pork were arranged with the slightly frantic over-organization of people who needed to do something and had chosen to do this. 8 sets of parents were standing near the door, and when the children came through the noise they made, a ragged, collective, involuntary sound, not words, just the sound of relief being a physical thing, broke loose from the hall's stone walls and hung in the air. Wren handed children to parents with the same precision she had used to get them onto the horses. She confirmed names, answered the panicked parental questions. Is he hurt? Is she cold? Is the cough serious? With the calm of someone who had been taking inventory for the past 8 hours and knew the answers exactly. And then she stepped back, not to the center of the room, to the edge of it, to the wall near the back where the light from the hearth was dimmer and the crowd was facing away from her. She was still shaking, though she was trying not to. I had gone to speak with Kievan, who was attempting to be authoritative now that the crisis had resolved itself, and I had gotten perhaps 3 sentences into the conversation before I understood that I was watching the far wall more than I was watching Kievan. I stopped mid-sentence. "My king." "Who is she?" I said. Kievan blinked. "I told you she's a ward, came to us 10 years ago. Her village there was a flood in the lower valley, several families lost." Her name, I said, her full name. She has given us only Ren. We have added Ironmere to it for the record, but she doesn't know her house name. She was very young when she came to us. No wolf. None that has ever appeared. We assumed. He stopped himself. He was not quite brave enough to say out loud what they had assumed. What do you pay her? I said. A long pause. She has her board in her. What do you pay her? I said again, with the specific flatness in my voice that my counsel recognizes as the end of a thing. Kevin looked at the floor. She is a ward, he said. It is understood that in exchange for. She went alone into a blizzard at midnight, I said, with a lantern and a jar of honey, because 8 children were missing and your 4 search parties had come back without them. I let that sit for a moment. And she found them. And she sat in the snow for 6 hours, keeping them alive with nothing but her own body heat and a song. And she is standing at your back wall and shaking. And she is alone. And not one person in this hall has thought to bring her a bowl of soup. Kevin's mouth opened, closed. Bring her soup, I said, and walked across the hall. She was looking at the fire from a distance when I reached her, not warming herself, just looking, with the expression of someone who has put a difficult thing down and is deciding what to pick up next. She saw me coming and straightened slightly, though not with the rigid formality my rank usually produces. Just upright, present. Your men found the 4th search party, she said. I saw them come in. They looked all right. They are, I said, cold and embarrassed. The road to the shepherd's fold is not obvious in the snow, she said, without judgment. It curves. One of Kevin's household women appeared at Ren's elbow with a bowl of soup, delivered with such a combination of shame and overcompensation that it was almost painful to witness. Ren accepted it with genuine warmth, thanked the woman by name, and waited until the woman had retreated before she began to drink it, standing, watching the fire. I stood beside her and did not speak, which I find is often the correct decision. You're staying, she asked after a while. For the morning, at least. To collect the tribute. I hadn't thought about the tribute, I said honestly. She looked at me sideways. Not flirtatiously, she was not the kind of woman who deals in sidelong looks as currency, just genuinely curious. Why then? I did not have an answer that I understood yet, so I did not give her one. She nodded as if that were acceptable and went back to her soup. Fell, who had come into the hall at my heel and had been sitting 3 feet away from her since she stopped moving, made a sound that I had never heard him make, not in 11 years that he had been my wolf. It was low, not a whine and not a growl, something between the two, something that belonged to a register of wolf feeling I had not known he contained. Several people near us turned to look at him. He paid them no attention. He was looking at Ren. She looked down at him. Then she crouched slowly, because her legs were stiff with cold, and held out her hand. He pressed his face into it. Not the way a wolf accepts a stranger's greeting, cautious and contingent. He pressed his face into her hand the way a wolf comes home. I stood very still. You said he grieves, she said. She was not looking at me. She was looking at Fell, who had closed his eyes. I think he has been looking for something. Yes, I said. Did he find it? The question landed in me the way a key lands in the right lock, not with force, simply with the slight, irreversible feeling of something releasing. I think he did, I said. I should tell you about the mark. I had not felt it building. That is the strange thing. I have heard the older wolves describe the mate bond's approach as a kind of pressure, a tide coming in, and I had waited for that feeling for most of my adult life and eventually stopped waiting and assumed it would not come for me. 7 years of war will do that to a man. You stop expecting certain things. You put them in a room in yourself and close the door, and after long enough you forget the room is there. The mark appeared on my wrist when Fell pressed his face into her hand. I felt it before I saw it, a warmth that ran from somewhere in the center of my chest down my left arm to the bone of my wrist, and then a brief, sharp clarity, like the moment after you have been holding your breath for a very long time and you finally breathe. I looked down. The mark was there. Silver white, the shape of a running wolf in mid-leap, the lines of it neat as if they had been waiting under the skin and only needed permission to surface. I heard her breath catch. She was still crouched, still touching Fell, and she had turned her right hand over in her lap and was looking at her own wrist. The same mark, the same silver-white lines, running in the same direction, as if the wolf on my wrist and the wolf on hers were running toward each other. The hall had gone quiet in the way that halls do when something happens that has no precedent in the hall's experience. Not the hush of shock, something slower than that. The hush of recognition, of many people simultaneously understanding something that they had not understood a moment before. Fell lifted his head. And then he wept. I do not expect that to make sense to everyone. Wolves do not weep the way people do. What Fell did was this. He raised his great head, and from the inner corners of his eyes ran two lines of light, not water, not blood, but something that looked the way moonlight looks when it falls on moving water, pale gold, perfectly quiet. They ran down the gray fur of his muzzle and fell from his chin onto the stone floor of the hall, and where they fell the stone seemed for a moment to hold the warmth of them, a faint brightness that faded slowly. 7 years he had been silent, 7 years since the war. 7 years since whatever it was that was lost in the last winter of the war had been lost, and he had gone inside himself and gone quiet, and nothing, not a command, not a victory, not the peace treaties I had ridden 1,000 miles to sign, had reached him. He wept for perhaps 30 seconds, then he looked at Wren. She put her hand on his head and kept it there, and she looked up at me from where she was crouching, and her gray eyes were very bright, and I understood that she was someone who does not cry easily and was currently deciding not to, which is a different thing than not feeling it. I should stand up, she said. My legs have gone completely numb. I held out my hand. She took it and stood, and I did not let go of her hand after she was standing. She did not ask me to. Kevin had understood the situation by this point. He was, as I said, not a careless man, and the mate mark is visible, and Fell's golden tears on his hall floor were not something that admitted of multiple interpretations. He was standing at a careful distance with the expression of a man revising certain recent decisions and finding the process uncomfortable. I addressed him in the hall, with his people present and mine. The tribute is forgiven this season, I said. The pack of Ironmere lost 8 children in a blizzard and recovered all 8 without loss. That is more than tribute. I looked at Kevin. The woman called Wren, ward of this pack, is my fated mate. She will leave with me when I leave. I turned to the hall. She goes willingly and honored, and as Luna of the graven throne. There was a silence. I unslung my war cloak from my shoulders. It is heavy wool and wolf hide and has ridden through 3 campaigns and more council meetings than I can count, and it has very little ceremony attached to it, which is perhaps why it felt right. I put it around Wren's shoulders. She looked up at me. Her gray eyes asked a question. The formal ceremony will be at the Graven Citadel, I said quietly for her alone. But you are named now before these people, if that is your choice. You're asking, she said. Yes. She considered it. Not the opportunity. I don't think she thought about it in those terms. She was considering something else, something internal, the kind of question a person asks themselves when the life they have been living is about to become a different shape. I have 5 elderly people in this hold who depend on me, she said. We will arrange their care before we leave. There are 2 orphaned pups who will not understand where I have gone if I simply. They will come with us, I said, if you wish it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, is he all right, your wolf? She was looking at Fell, who was sitting beside us with the settled, ancient calm of a wolf who has finally arrived somewhere after a very long journey. His eyes were still bright, but he was not weeping anymore. He looked, if I am honest, like a wolf who had spent 7 years being extraordinarily patient and had just been proven right. "He is better than he has been in a long time," I said. She nodded, looked at the mark on her wrist, ran her thumb along it once slowly, tracing the shape of the running wolf. "All right," she said, "yes. There are things I could tell you about what happened in the days and weeks after, the ride south to the Graven Citadel, the ceremony, the council's reaction, which ranged from relieved to baffled to quietly moved. I could tell you about the 2 orphan pups, whose names were Bryn and Kit, who destroyed one of the Citadel's ceremonial tapestries within a week of arriving, and who fell supervised with the tolerant gravity of a wolf who has seen worse. I could tell you about the 5 elderly people of Ironmere, who were given a cottage in the Citadel's lower village, and who sent Wren letters that she read with the private expression of someone who is newly aware of being loved at a distance. But what stays with me, out of all of it, is the morning on the road. She had not called for help. She had taken a lantern and a jar of honey and her own coat, and her knowledge of a route she had watched small children practice 3 days before, and she had gone alone into a blizzard at midnight because 8 children were missing, and she was the one who knew where they might be. That was the whole of her reasoning. Not courage. She told me later she doesn't call it that. She said she simply could not make herself not go. That is a particular kind of character. I have spent a long time around powerful men, men who announce their strength and require witnesses for it. And I had not understood until that morning at the tree line that there is a different strength entirely, the kind that goes quietly in the dark and does not wait to be recognized, and does not weigh the odds and does not count the cost. I had been looking, without knowing it, for the mate whose kind of courage was the opposite of mine, who moves not from force but from simple, absolute refusal to leave someone alone in the cold. Fell had known. Of course Fell had known. He had been dreaming of her for 7 years and being patient about it with a patience that, I think now, was itself a kind of mercy, letting me fight my wars, letting me sign my treaties, waiting until I was finally standing still enough to be found. Kevin of Ironmere sent a formal letter to the Citadel 4 months after we left, on the occasion of the Luna ceremony, which was attended by every pack lord from the northern vale to the southern coast. The letter was correct and properly worded and said all the appropriate things. Near the end of it there was a line that I suspect he wrote and then left in because he did not quite have the nerve to cut it. We did not know what she was worth. I keep that letter, not out of satisfaction. I am past satisfaction about that particular failure. I keep it because it is the most honest thing Kevin has ever committed to writing, and because occasionally it is useful to remember what it looks like when someone tells the truth about the moment they realize they were wrong. She was worth is worth the whole of the account, the blizzard, the pine sap, the 35 seconds of Fell's golden tears on the stone floor, the war cloak I put around her shoulders before any ceremony had been arranged and before I had worked out the proper form of words, because some things do not wait for proper forms of words. The hold full of children who are, this winter and every winter, tucked in safe because she went alone into the dark when no one else did. She does not remember how long she sang at the base of that pine. I asked her once and she said she hadn't been counting, that the point of the singing was not to count but to continue. I find that this is also, somewhat unexpectedly, excellent advice for a king. The point is not to count. The point is to continue. Fell is no longer silent. He sings too in the low wolf way when she is in the room. It is not music exactly, but it is the opposite of grief, which is close enough.